Canada is a country rooted in the rule of law, and the protection of our citizens is paramount. That's why, when our law enforcement and intelligence officials began pursuing credible allegations that agents of the Government of India were directly involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, on Canadian soil, we responded. Nous avons partagé nos inquiétudes avec le gouvernement de l'Inde et lui avons demandé de travailler avec nous pour faire la lumière sur cet important enjeu. En même temps, les services de police et les organismes de sécurité ont utilisé tous leurs outils pour assurer la sécurité des Canadiens. Aujourd'hui, étant donné les nouvelles preuves présentées par la GRC, nous prenons des mesures additionnelles pour protéger les Canadiens. As the RCMP Commissioner stated earlier, they have clear and compelling evidence that agents of the Government of India have engaged in and continue to engage in activities that pose a significant threat to public safety. This includes clandestine information gathering techniques, coercive behavior targeting South Asian Canadians, and involvement in over a dozen threatening and violent acts, including murder. This is unacceptable. While attempts have been made by the RCMP and national security officials to work with the Government of India and Indian law enforcement counterparts on this matter, they have been repeatedly refused. This is why, this weekend, Canadian officials took an extraordinary step. They met with Indian officials to share RCMP evidence which concluded 6 agents of the Government of India are persons of interest in criminal activities. And despite repeated requests to the Government of India, it has decided not to cooperate. Étant donné le fait que le gouvernement de l'Inde refuse toujours de coopérer, ma collègue, la ministre Joly, n'avait qu'un seul choix. Aujourd'hui, elle a émis un avis d'expulsion pour ces 6 individus. Ils doivent quitter le Canada. Ils ne seront plus en mesure d'agir à titre de diplomates au Canada, ni d'entrer à nouveau au Canada, peu importe la raison. Let me be clear. The evidence brought to light by the RCMP cannot be ignored. It leads to one conclusion. It is necessary to disrupt the criminal activities that continue to pose a threat to public safety in Canada. That is why we acted, because we will always, first and foremost, stand for the rights of Canadians to feel safe and secure in their own country. We will never tolerate the involvement of a foreign government threatening and killing Canadian citizens on Canadian soil, a deeply unacceptable violation of Canada's sovereignty and of international law. À nouveau, nous demandons au gouvernement de l'Inde de coopérer avec nous sur cette enquête, de mettre fin à son inaction et à sa rhétorique trompeuse, de reconnaître la crédibilité et la sévérité des preuves et des informations que nous avons partagées jusqu'à maintenant et de réitérer de façon claire que sa position sur les opérations extrajudiciaires à l'étranger sera désormais sans équivoque alignée avec le droit international. Le Canada va toujours défendre l'État de droit et les principes fondamentaux sur lesquels s'appuient les sociétés libres et démocratiques. Nous incitons le gouvernement de l'Inde à en faire de même. I know the events of the past year and today's revelations have shaken many Canadians, particularly those in the Indo-Canadian and Sikh community. Many of you are angry, upset, frightened. I get that. This shouldn't happen. Canada and India have a long and storied history rooted in people-to-people ties, business, and trade. But we cannot abide by what we're seeing right now. Canada fully respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of India, and we expect the Indian government to do the same for Canada. As Prime Minister, it is my responsibility to provide reassurance to those who are feeling their safety has been compromised, but most importantly, it is my responsibility to take action and to never hesitate in doing what is necessary to protect Canadians. That is precisely what we are doing today. I'll now turn it over to Minister LeBlanc to provide additional details on these developments. Dominic.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Bonjour à tous. Les graves conclusions présentées aujourd'hui par le commissaire de la GRC sont le résultat de plusieurs mois d'enquête et de travail acharné, évidemment de la part de la GRC, c'est sûr, mais en collaboration avec des corps de police partout au pays, dans des grandes villes comme Toronto, Surrey, Edmonton, partout au Canada et des corps de police provinciaux aussi. J'aimerais remercier tous ceux et celles qui ont joué un rôle dans cette enquête tellement complexe. For many Canadians, particularly Indo-Canadians and members of the Sikh community, this news will be understandably very upsetting. The actions that are alleged to have taken place on Canadian soil are indeed a grave violation of our sovereignty and of Canada's rule of law. But I also hope that Canadians find relief in knowing that our law enforcement and national security agencies are working to keep them safe and to hold to account those who seek to harm Canadians. I strongly encourage all Canadians, and in particular leaders in the South Asian and particularly the Sikh communities, to continue to work with law enforcement officials. For generations, people from every corner of the globe have come to Canada seeking a better life, precisely because they felt that the Canadian government would duly fulfill one of our most fundamental duties, to keep them safe. And our law enforcement agencies work every day to uphold that promise. And I once again want to thank the RCMP and their law enforcement partners for their important work in this matter. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à ma collègue, la ministre des Affaires étrangères, qui pourra vous en dire plus sur les actions que le Canada a prises en réponse à ces conclusions. Alors, Mélanie, à toi la parole. Pardon.
Merci, Dominic. So, as I've said from the beginning, a year ago, we have three clear priorities when it comes to these incidents targeting Canadian citizens. First, we will seek the truth, that the police force are allowed to carry out their work and hold those responsible to account. Second, of course, to protect Canadian safety, and thirdly, to defend Canada's sovereignty. Based on information provided to Global Affairs Canada by the RCMP, we formally requested that India waive diplomatic immunity for 6 individuals based here in Canada and for India to cooperate in the investigation. This was done so that these individuals could be questioned in relation to the ongoing RCMP investigation into a number of violent incidents targeting members of the South Asian community, particularly the Sikh community, in many cities across the country. And you heard the Minister of Public Safety, my dear colleague and friend Dominc LeBlanc, mentioning different cities across the country. Regrettably, as India did not agree, and given the ongoing public safety concerns for Canadians, Canada served notices of expulsions to 6 diplomats and consular officials early this morning. Subsequent to those notices, India announced it would withdraw its officials. To be clear, we're not seeking diplomatic confrontation with India, but we will not sit quietly as agents of any country are linked to efforts to threaten, harass, or even kill Canadians, period. Canada is guided by the rule of law. We follow the Vienna Convention at all times, and we expect, of course, India to do the same as well. We will always continue to ask for India's cooperation to the investigation, I did so formally again by being in contact with the Foreign Minister of India, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, earlier today. And I've been also in contact with all my counterparts from the Five Eyes, so Foreign Minister Lamy from the UK, Secretary of State Blinken from the US, Penny Wong, also the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Australia, and Winston Peters, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs of New Zealand. Comme je l'ai dit depuis le début, nous avons 3 priorités claires en ce qui concerne les incidents visant des citoyens canadiens. Le premier, la recherche de la vérité, afin que les forces de l'ordre soient en mesure d'accomplir leur travail et de s'assurer de demander, dans le fond, des comptes aux responsables. Deuxièmement, protéger les Canadiens. Et troisièmement, défendre la souveraineté du Canada. Sur la base des informations fournies à Affaires mondiales Canada par la GRC, nous avons officiellement demandé à l'Inde de lever l'immunité diplomatique de 6 personnes basées au Canada, ainsi que de coopérer pleinement à l'enquête. Cette demande a été faite afin que ces personnes puissent être interrogées dans le cadre de l'enquête en cours de la GRC sur un certain nombre d'incidents violents visant des membres de la communauté sud-asiatique au Canada, en particulier la communauté Sikh. Malheureusement, puisque l'Inde a refusé de coopérer et compte tenu des risques pour la sécurité des Canadiens, nous avons, tôt ce matin, signé des avis d'expulsion à 6 diplomates et agents consulaires basés au Canada. Et à la suite de ces avis, l'Inde a annoncé qu'elle retirait ses diplomates. Pour être clair, nous ne cherchons pas la confrontation diplomatique avec l'Inde, mais nous ne resterons pas silencieux devant des informations que des agents de quelque pays que ce soit soient liés à des efforts visant à menacer, à harceler, voire même à tuer des Canadiens. Point final. Le Canada est guidé par l'État de droit. Bien entendu, on va continuer de respecter en tout temps la Convention de Vienne et nous attendons à ce que l'Inde fasse de même. Nous allons toujours continuer de demander à ce que l'Inde coopère avec l'enquête. Et j'ai été en contact avec le ministre des Affaires étrangères de l'Inde, mon homologue, le ministre Jaishankar, à ce sujet plus tôt aujourd'hui. Et j'ai été également en communication avec les ministres des 5 Five Eyes, donc les ministres britanniques, américains, australiens et néo-zélandais. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. En marge du sommet au Laos, la semaine dernière, vous avez rencontré le premier ministre Modi. On comprend que sur le coup, vous n'étiez pas autorisé à aller dans le détail. Est-ce que vous pouvez aller dans le détail de ce que vous lui avez dit puis de sa réaction à lui?
Quand j'ai parlé au premier ministre Modi au Laos il y a quelques jours, j'ai souligné à quel point la rencontre au Singapour de nos conseillers en sécurité nationale était importante et devait être prise au sérieux. Il a exprimé qu'il était au courant de cette rencontre, qu'ils allaient nous entendre à ce moment-là. When I spoke with Prime Minister Modi at the end of last week, I highlighted how incredibly important the meeting between our national security advisors in Singapore this weekend was going to be. He told me that he was aware of that meeting. I impressed upon him that it needed to be taken very, very seriously.
Ce matin, la GRC, en conférence de presse, parlait d'extorsion, d'homicide. Vous l'avez mentionné, vous aussi. C'est des choses, des accusations qui évoquent davantage un régime autocrate, donc des dictatures. Qu'est-ce que ça dit sur l'Inde, le fait qu'il soit soupçonné de tout ça?
Je crois que l'Inde a fait une erreur monumentale en choisissant d'utiliser leurs diplomates et le crime organisé pour attaquer les Canadiens, pour venir faire sentir les Canadiens pas en sécurité ici chez eux et encore plus pour créer des actes de violence et même des homicides. C'est inacceptable. Et notre but aujourd'hui, le but de la GRC, ça a été de venir empêcher ce processus par lequel les diplomates prenaient des informations sur les Canadiens, qu'ils passaient ensuite à du crime organisé pour s'attaquer aux Canadiens. Il fallait qu'on vienne déranger et perturber et empêcher ces actions de se passer. Et c'est pour ça que la GRC a choisi de prendre action aujourd'hui.
In English, please.
I think it is obvious that the government of India made a fundamental error in thinking that they could engage in supporting criminal activity against Canadians here on Canadian soil, whether it be murders or extortion or other violent acts. It is absolutely unacceptable for any country, any democracy that upholds the rule of law. That is why we have taken such significant measures, why the RCMP chose to come out today and disrupt the pattern of Indian diplomats collecting through questionable and illegal means information on Canadian citizens that were then fed to criminal organizations that would then take violent actions, from extortion to murder, against Canadians. No country, particularly not a democracy that upholds the rule of law, can accept this fundamental violation of its sovereignty. Canada fully accepts and respects the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of India. We expect India to do the same. In this case, they did not.
Next question.
Tonda McCharles, Toronto Star. Sir, given the magnitude of the diplomatic disruption that's happened now, I wonder if you can give us some clarity, because while I think I'm trying to read into what you're saying, that these 6 diplomats were sharing information with others. Are those others, the criminal organizations, the so-called agents of India, or are you saying the actual diplomats and consular officials were actively involved in the events? And one other clarity, if you could provide in terms of the time frame you're talking about. Is it over the last 4 weeks? Is it since the last 2 years? Just some clarity on those two things.
As the RCMP Commissioner pointed out this morning, these are ongoing investigations that are already before the courts in some situations and will end up in trials in the coming months in other situations. So what the RCMP can share and the details of this are extremely limited. As those trials unfold, much more will be known. The decision to inform Canadians right now by the RCMP is aimed at keeping Canadians safe, at disrupting this pattern of behavior that these Indian diplomats have been involved in, and ensuring that Canadians can feel safer, knowing that the RCMP is extremely active in these investigations and in following up on these criminal activities.
So again, around the diplomatic sort of explosion now we've seen in your relationships, your government's reached out to the Five Eyes allies. What pledge of support have you gotten from each of those? Are they backing you up in these claims? And what repercussions do you expect?
Well, first of all, let's highlight that none of us want to be in this situation. This is not a choice that Canada made to create a chill in Canada-India relations. India is an important democracy, is a country with which we have deep historical people-to-people business ties, at a time where the instability around geopolitics mean democracies have to stick together. That is why when we started to understand through intelligence agencies that India was possibly, if not probably, behind Nijjar's killing, the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil last summer, our first choice, our first actions were to reach out, yes, to our Five Eyes partners, but also to the government of India, to say, we know this has happened. Work with us to fix this. We don't want to be having this fight, but obviously the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil is not something that we can ignore as a country. So every step of the way, we have apprised India of what we know. I've spoken directly with Prime Minister Modi. We have engaged with intelligence counterparts. And unfortunately, every step of the way, both after I made the statement in the House of Commons last September and till now, the response of the Indian government has been to deny, to obfuscate, to attack me personally and the integrity of the Government of Canada and its officials and its police agencies. And we have simply said, we're going to allow our agencies to do the work, particularly to move from intelligence collection from agencies to police investigations that result in arrests, trials, and consequences within a rigorous and robust and independent judicial system. That has been our approach every step of the way. And indeed, over this past week, when the RCMP reached out to its law enforcement counterparts in India, there was a path where we could have worked together to ensure accountability and changes and steps that would have resulted in keeping Canadians safe, because that is our top priority. India, the Indian government, rejected those advances, rejected our attempts to find some way through this. And that brought us to this point of having to disrupt the chain of operations that go from Indian diplomats here in Canada to criminal organizations to direct violent impacts on Canadians right across this country.
Next question.
What support did you get from your allies when you reached out to them? You didn't answer.
La situation dans laquelle on se retrouve est extrêmement indésirable. Non seulement on ne voudrait pas que des Canadiens soient en train d'être soumis à la violence dans leur communauté, chez eux, mais aussi on ne veut pas avoir ces tensions dans les relations avec l'Inde. C'est pour ça que l'année passée, comme dans la dernière semaine, nous avons approché le gouvernement de l'Inde par nos agences de sécurité, par nos diplomates, par nos agences policières, pour chercher une façon de résoudre ce différend profond pour protéger les Canadiens, pour créer une situation de redevabilité, de conséquences, mais pas pour venir détruire les bonnes relations ou les relations entre l'Inde et le Canada. Malheureusement, l'Inde n'a pas choisi de travailler avec nous, a choisi de nier et de repousser et de faire des attaques personnelles contre ce gouvernement et mettant en question l'intégrité de nos agences et de nos institutions. Et nous avons dû répondre pour protéger les Canadiens. Par rapport à nos alliés, ça fait depuis les débuts de l'année passée qu'on a partagé toutes les informations qu'on avait avec nos alliés, particulièrement avec les Five Eyes. On sait que les Américains sont en train de vivre une situation parallèle avec un attentat d'homicide chez eux. Et nous allons continuer de travailler avec eux. From the beginning, as of last summer, we've worked closely with our Five Eyes partners, particularly with the United States, where they have gone through similar pattern of behavior from India in regards to an attempted extrajudicial killing. And we will continue to work with our allies as we stand up together for the rule of law.
Next question.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Maxime Huard, Radio-Canada.
Il y a une fronde qui s'organise au sein de votre parti pour vous évincer du leadership. Comment comptez-vous y répondre?
J'ai eu beaucoup de conversations avec de mes députés, avec mon équipe cette fin de semaine, mais ça a été sur les enjeux sérieux auxquels on est en train de répondre sur la sécurité des Canadiens. Il n'y a rien de plus important que le bien-être des Canadiens, le fait qu'ils doivent se sentir en sécurité chez eux. Et donc, c'est sur cet enjeu-là que nous travaillons depuis plusieurs jours. Il y aura d'autres journées pour parler de processus interne du parti. Aujourd'hui, on met à l'avant-plan la sécurité des Canadiens et je m'attends à ce que tous les parlementaires soient unis sur l'enjeu de défendre la souveraineté du Canada et la sécurité de tous les Canadiens.
In English, please.
I had many conversations with members of my team and caucus members over the past number of days, and all those conversations were focused on the well-being and the safety of Canadians faced with these significant security concerns and allegations. The safety of Canadians is the number one thing that any government, that any parliamentarians should be preoccupied with, and that is exactly what we're focused on. There will be time to talk about internal party intrigue at another moment, but right now, this government, and indeed all parliamentarians, should be focused on standing up for Canada's sovereignty, standing against interference, and looking to be there to support Canadians in this difficult moment.
Donc, malgré la grogne, comptez-vous toujours être à la tête de votre parti aux prochaines élections?
Oui. Yes.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Merci tout le monde.
The ministers will remain to take additional questions.
Minister LeBlanc, we can't hear local news. Can you outline, we heard from the RCMP that there's a number of homicides that have been involved. Can you tell us the number of homicides that the Canadian government believes agents of the Indian government have been involved with?
So again, I wouldn't want to exceed the words of Commissioner Duhem this morning. I read very carefully his statement. He outlines a number of serious criminal activities in which they believe they have evidence of these Indian government agents participating. He talked about homicides and extortion, but these are also ongoing investigations. The Prime Minister just said it. I understand the interest in this matter, but I think the most important thing I can do as Minister of Public Safety is support the RCMP in continuing to investigate these serious crimes and hopefully bring them to Crown prosecutors who lay charges and hopefully present them in the appropriate court to get convictions. So speculating on how many and what's a homicide and what's not, I don't want to speak for the RCMP, particularly when they are seized with ongoing criminal investigations. I think that's very, very important.
Minister Joly, in the future, since there's been the number of expulsions today, is the Canadian government willing to accept additional diplomats coming from India in the future? And will there be any other reviews into people who could potentially be brought in here to make sure that they are safe and secure?
Well, thanks for the question, because I said it in my remarks. We don't want diplomatic confrontation with India. We know that there are thousands of Canadians that go to India every year. We have lots of people from India coming to Canada as well. So we know that there are deep people-to-people ties and want to make sure that these are still possible. And so in that sense, we are asking India to cooperate in the investigation, period. And they have a way of doing it. They're doing it with the US. They can do it with us as well. On Tanda's question a bit earlier with the Five Eyes, I think what is really important to understand is that there's a difference between the US investigation and ours in the sense that, first and foremost, a Canadian died here in Canada. So there's an investigation happening about a murder case. That's the first difference. The second difference is it is sitting diplomats that were involved in violent incidents. And so that's really important to remember. And that's why we took the steps we took. And thirdly, the violence actually increased following the allegations a year ago. And so that's why it was important for the RCMP to take the steps that they took. Now, the similarity between the US and the Canadian case is also the fact that in both cases, it is difficult to get the cooperation from the government of India, notwithstanding the processes that are in place with the Americans.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Ministers. Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Ms. Joly, last week at the Foreign Interference Inquiry, you were asked specifically about the killing of Hardeep Singh Malik. The inquiry asked you if Mr. Malik if his murder was linked to India. His murder was 2 years ago in 2022. You didn't answer that question. I'm wondering if you can now clarify whether, given that the government's talking about multiple homicides, this homicide is also connected to Indian agent involvement.
So, Marike, I couldn't answer because I'm not the Minister of Public Safety, nor, the head of the commission.
That's not cool. Because I won't answer it either.
No, but the reality is that's a question you should be asking the RCMP. But what I said, though, in front of the inquiry, the public inquiry on foreign interference, is that there were clear preoccupations regarding the fact that there was agents of the Indian government that were involved in violence here against Canadians. And that's why I stand by my word.
Okay, and Mr. LeBlanc, do you want to add more to that answer? I mean,
No, full points for trying,
there's
Marika.
this question, right? You're saying
no.
homicides, but there's no other details.
So I'm adamant that we should stick to the four corners of the RCMP statement that they made today. That statement would have obviously been worked on with prosecutors and others who are seized with actual cases before the courts and maybe preparing other charges. So I just think it's so important to let the RCMP do the terrific work they do and hopefully lead to further charges and other convictions. I think speculating on who may or may not be in what category in that statement. If the RCMP didn't give that information, it's for a very specific reason. So I don't think it's helpful if I would add to it today.
Okay. I told you he could answer.
I didn't answer it either, but...
Hopefully you can answer this question. Mr. Joly, the NDP are calling for more severe action. You've expelled diplomats, but they're saying sanctions are warranted given the severity of the allegations leveled today. Is the federal government considering sanctions against India? And if it's not sanctions, what other steps are you considering taking?
So today was a really important step. When you look at what is available in our toolbox, expulsing diplomats is one of the highest the highest and the toughest measure that a country can take under the Vienna Convention. For the rest, we'll continue to push India to make sure that they cooperate. We'll continue to engage with our Five Eyes partners. We'll continue to engage with also all our G7 partners, and everything is on the table.
Next
Thank
question.
Hi, Ministers. Tom Perry with CBC. Minister LeBlanc, can I ask you, have you managed to, has this operation disrupted this plot, or whatever you want to call it, or should Sikh Canadians still be worried? Are they still in danger, some of them?
So, Tom, I'm happy to answer the question, but Melanie got a chance to answer Tonda's earlier question, so I'll do it too and then come to your question, Tonda. Tonda, I spoke this morning, or this afternoon rather, with the United States Attorney General, Merrick Garland, discussed with him what the RCMP were doing in Ottawa today. He and I discussed the importance of the FBI and the RCMP continuing to share information as these various criminal cases continue. There's a great deal of information shared between Five Eyes partners. As Melanie and the Prime Minister said, the U.S., because of the shared border, is a critical piece of that effort. And I also was in contact with the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. So the work with Five Eyes and the British Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, but the work with Five Eyes countries really is to ensure that the police are sharing information so that Canadian police can investigate crimes in Canada, but sometimes foreign police have interesting and helpful evidence in that work. So in that sense, there's a very, very active ongoing cooperation and has been from the beginning. Tom, you asked a very, I think, important question. The RCMP took the extraordinary step of calling a news conference on Thanksgiving Monday to publicly disclose evidence that they've collected over a number of months in a series of criminal investigations spanning many, many different parts of the country. That's unusual. Usually we learn about these things when a prosecutor goes to court and lays a charge, an RCMP officer swears an information, which then becomes public and becomes the basis of a criminal charge. So the extraordinary step that they took today in their independent judgment was because they believe it was important for the safety of Canadians to disrupt and dismantle what was increasingly an active and organized criminal network across the country. So my colleague's decision, the Foreign Affairs Minister's decision to expulse 6 particular individuals working for the Indian government, I think sends an important step in terms of disrupting that ongoing criminal activity. And I would think that the RCMP will continue to do the work they're doing in ongoing criminal investigations. And I hope and think that we'll see more charges and more arrests. But this was their decision to, in the interest of public safety, try and disrupt and dismantle an organized criminal enterprise that was representing, in their view, a threat to the public safety of Canadians.
And Minister Joly, could I ask you, why do you think India felt this sense of impunity? Why do you think the Indian government thought it could get away with this?
Tom, that's a question you need to ask them. So, but what I know is transnational repression, targeting dissidents is something that we see more and more in different democracies by states. And for us, it is a question of principle. Today is about Canadian safety. This is about Canada, and we need to send a strong message. And I hope also that we're sending a strong message to other Western democracies that are dealing with this, because this is not only happening in Canada. And so that's why I think it is important that Canadians are aware. It is important that India gets the message.
Last question.
Minister LeBlanc, I hear what you're saying about not wanting to speak out of turn with ongoing investigations happening, but neither the government nor the RCMP are saying how many Canadians are dead as a result of the actions of the Indian government and its agents. And so that creates a very frightening information void. People are probably going to want to fill in those blanks. So what is your message to the community that's being targeted in terms of the scope of the violence associated with this situation?
So again, you're asking a question that your colleague asked previously in terms of how many and so on. The RCMP are in the best position to decide how and when and what they would say to a question like that. That is very much in terms of a criminal operation and investigation. Politicians, as you know, aren't involved in the details in any way of those operations. But the second part of your question, I agree with entirely. We understand, particularly in the Sikh community, but other members in the South Asian communities across the country as well, a very real concern. I have heard from my caucus colleagues, I have heard from community leaders, I have heard from mayors of big cities and small towns about, for example, rash of extortion cases that their local police were dealing with. There were a number of violent acts that were reported in regional and local media. And we hear from our colleagues and from the community all the time a growing and very real concern about their safety. That's why we've done things like at Public Safety Canada improve access to a security infrastructure program to help them with places of worship, community gathering places, feel more secure, hire private security, install security cameras, reinforce entranceways. There have been a series of things that we've tried to do so that when these communities gather, they can feel as safe as they possibly can, understanding the very real fears that have been borne out over many months. So when they saw the RCMP commissioner stand there today and discuss publicly what many of these people have been saying to us for a long time, many of these community members, I hope they found some reassurance in the fact that the RCMP referred to this as evidence. I hope they took some comfort in the fact that the RCMP decided to publicly take the extraordinary step of talking about this at a news conference on a holiday Monday precisely to disrupt and dismantle, in their judgment, some of this criminal network. But I also think they need to understand that the RCMP will continue to do their very good work. I saw a list of over a dozen municipal and provincial police forces with whom they're collaborating on ongoing criminal investigations. So this is by no means a conclusion to the story. This is an important public step that the RCMP took, but they'll continue to do the great work they did, for example, in the murder of a Canadian citizen, Mr. Nijjar. They'll continue to do that work as they investigate other criminal allegations.
We obviously have an inquiry going on into foreign interference right now. Much of this isn't captured by that mandate. Are there any discussions about expanding that mandate to include some of the violent incidences involved that we're talking about today?
I'm going to have the privilege, Melanie was there last week, I'm going to be there tomorrow afternoon. I'm sure you'll all be riveted to that testimony when I'm at the UG Commission tomorrow. The HUG Commission's mandate looks at foreign interference into democratic institutions and democratic processes. If you look at what Commissioner Duhem and the RCMP talked about, their evidence having uncovered, one of it was the Indian government's attempt to interfere in democratic institutions or processes in Canada. But it's an independent commission. We don't need to expand their mandate if the commission decides to look at this particular circumstance of foreign interference. But again, without speaking for the commission, having been there a number of times myself, they're very much seized with India as a country that has been an actor in the space of foreign interference. So I have every confidence that their report will look at these issues in a very fulsome way, and I certainly look forward to their recommendations at the end of this year.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's press conference. Thank you.